Andy, thank you very much for joining us in this series of conversations we're having with academicals who have succeeded on and off the field in the world of sport. You've actually recently finished a major drama project with Netflix. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was the English Game, which was a Netflix miniseries talking about the origins of football, how it developed from being an amateur pastime to a professional career. And it so happened I'd written a biography of one of the main characters, Arthur Kinnaird, and I'd also researched the stories of some of the other players who came to England in the late 1870s, Fergie Souter, Jimmy Love. And when the program was being made, they got in touch with me to ask if I could come on board as a kind of advisor to tell them a bit more about the people and how the game was played in those days. And there was a lot of to and fro with them as they asked me questions, everything from how people would wear their shin guards to what kind of whistle the referee would blow, what tactics they would use, and so on. So it was great fun being involved, and the series went down really well.
Were there a lot of Scots involved in the English Game, even back in the 1870s?
There were very few, and those that were there tended to be people who'd moved to England for the sake of their career. So they carried on their day job, and it so happened that they had some football or sporting background and took part in clubs. But what really changed in 1878 to be precise, was that a couple of guys went down from Glasgow to Lancashire, specifically having been recruited to play football. And although they still had a day job to start with, it was a kind of sinecure, safe job. And their main reason for being there was to play football, and they were paid to play football, which was a first. And that was how the game started to become professional. And within 10 years, it was recognized that professionalism was here to stay, and it become legalized. But in the early days, it was all under the counter because it was frowned upon by the powers that be.
Looking at your rather classy backdrop, where you've got books, memorabilia, badges, pictures of teams. Obviously, sport is a love of yours. It signals that you're both a writer and a historian, as well as a consultant. Do you class yourself as a historian who's a writer, or a writer who loves sport?
Well, they both go hand in hand. I suppose I trained as a writer before I became a historian as such. And I've had a long career in the media and journalism. So you could say I was trained as a writer, but the historian side is purely self-taught. Mm-hmm. I'm lucky in that, although I've never had any formal teaching as a historian since sitting my O-levels back in the 1970s, I do come from a family of history buffs. So what my parents, my grandparents taught me was to have a healthy interest in history. And that gave me quite a good, solid background to the kind of work that I do now.
Good. Well, we'll talk about your career later, but your days at the Edinburgh Academy, when were you there, and why did you choose, or was the Edinburgh Academy chosen for you?
It was very much chosen for me because I went when I was 5 years old. I did the full term, 1963 to 76, 13 years of the Academy. So from Prep 1C up to the upper sevenths. I don't know if they use still the same names for classes, but I knew nothing else in terms of my school education. And emerged in 1976 into the wide open world, having been enclosed in that little bubble for all of my formative years.
What are your memories of that little bubble?
On the whole, pretty positive. It's the kind of thing that you don't really appreciate so much at the time when you're there, because it's the only existence you've known. But I made a lot of good friends there. I think I came out of it as a fairly well-educated, rounded individual. And I, I think I was lucky. We were all lucky because we benefited from that privileged education and a very good place to be
What
overall.
do you have many great sporting memories from Raeburn Place or Newfield?
Um, on the whole, no. I mean, personally, I was no great shakes as a sportsman. I had rugby and cricket rammed down my throat from an early age. And to be honest, I couldn't wait to give up both of those. So by the time I was 15 in the winter, I managed to escape rugby and started playing football for the last couple of years, which was in a very desultory manner.
Was that for the school or for someone else?
It was within the school. I think they'd recognised that there were some older pupils by that stage who were not going to make it in rugby. I'd been the star of the C3s when I was 15 years old, but that's not any great shakes. I was never going to make it into the first or second 15 or anything like that. So I found the rugby could be quite demanding and brutal and muddy and whatever. It wasn't really to my taste, so I was quite happy to give that up. And in the summertime, after honest, I found cricket incredibly slow and tedious. So I shifted to hockey and played for the school hockey team. And I had great fun doing that because I was a goalkeeper and took part in quite a few good matches. You could travel around the country on a Saturday up to Perthshire to play Glenalmond or Strathallan or around the schools of the Central Belt. So I wasn't perhaps the traditional Accie sportsman, but I prefer to enjoy my sport rather than having to aim for the really top level stuff.
It was very much a tradition of the first term and a half was rugby, a half term of cross country running, which I imagine you and I probably didn't succeed much in, and then summer being cricket. And an erstwhile classmate of ours, because we're in the same class for a while, said, "Yeah, you were the football guy in a rugby playing school. You were slightly odd in that respect,
Yes.
and odd in a nice way." Did you feel a bit odd, thinking, "I hate all this rugby. I'd rather be down at Easter Road or Tynecastle"?
I wasn't the only one. Perhaps I maybe took it a bit more seriously than some others. But
You were above the parapet, let's say.
Yes. When I was about 12 or so, boys in my street who weren't at the academy induced me to go down to Easter Road to watch Hibs. And I was almost immediately hooked and started going to football most Saturday afternoons, something which I've done now for the rest of my life. And I soon became fascinated by this game, which opened up a whole new world to me outside the academy. So yeah, I was very much the football guy around, but I wasn't by any means the only one. And there were quite a few others who also went to watch football. And as I'm sure it is today, people would talk about the football matches on a Monday morning when he went to school. And I wasn't short of people to talk about that with.
I think things have changed since we have been there, and they now operate quite a number of sports. And of course, now that it's co-educational, it means that there's that you wouldn't be such a standout figure, and I think there'll be something for everyone. But looking back on it, both in sports terms, but in general terms, what skills do you think the academy taught you either implicitly or explicitly that you think you've sort of taken through your career, little touchstones?
I think the greatest benefits I took from it were the implicit ones, the sort of the skills you don't even notice that you're acquiring, in terms of taking responsibility for not just your own actions, but for the ability to take decisions, to manage projects, to get on and do things, rather than just sitting back and waiting for things to be done for you. And again, I wasn't aware of it at the time because you're focusing on your education, your exams, and so on. But when you emerge from the academy, certainly I found that I was always volunteering for committees at university, um, being able to run organizations or to take on board responsibility. And that ability to take on responsibility was perhaps the key thing that I got out of the academy education. And I don't know how I was taught it, but you can see that from an awful lot of other people who came out of the academy. They also had that ability. So I think it was drummed into us that we were, if not born to lead, but we were born to be responsible individuals, and we could make an impact in the wider world. I was very fortunate in that whilst I was at university, it was a 4-year course with a year abroad, but quite early on, I discovered an interest in journalism. I mean, for me, the light bulb moment was actually speaking to a journalist who I was introduced to, and I suddenly thought, hey, I could do that. So I started volunteering for the university newspaper. In my summer holidays, I did reviews for Edinburgh Festival shows, and I worked on local papers there. And even in my year abroad in France, I took a journalism course. So by the time I graduated in 1980, I already had a reasonable portfolio of things I'd done off my own bat. And I thought, well, this would be a good chance to get a job. And it actually was very helpful when I was job seeking, because I had something to show people and say, look, I'm not only interested, but I've actually put it into practice. And I got taken on as a graduate trainee by the Scotsman, and they sent me to their training course in Newcastle, Thomson Regional Newspapers Training Centre, where they taught me things like touch typing, shorthand, how to write a story in 1 paragraph. When you've done that, you can move on to writing a story in 2 paragraphs, and so on. So it is a very solid background in journalism. I then went to the Scotsman and discovered that the real world of journalism was a far removed from the theoretical side of it. And that didn't go too well. I didn't enjoy my time working on a national paper. I was far too young and inexperienced for that. They didn't particularly appreciate me either. So I left the Scotsman after a year, and I was still interested in the media. I wanted to do it, but I followed a different path and got involved in a whole range of other different projects. I worked on tourism guidebooks. I went to the Middle East for a few years, worked on magazines there. I ended up doing running a company that did in-house magazines. And I was a press officer for various companies, including Scottish Gas, Scottish Hydroelectric. So I moved around a lot in the first 15, 20 years or so of my career.
Which people tend to do, you know.
Yeah, and moving around was almost like a sort of, not so much an occupational hazard, but a good way of gaining experience in a whole range of different fields.
And then come 1997, you married both your love of football with your business and journalistic press officer experience, where you become the first head of communications at the Scottish Football Association, which sounds to many people like a kind of a poisoned chalice, but I suspect to you would be, you know, you died and gone to heaven. Was it probably a mixture of the two, I suspect?
It was a mixture of the two. I was very lucky in that I had this abiding interest in football, because throughout all this career, I had continued to write about football, watch football, and developing my interest in the sport, but I'd never worked in it. Yeah. And at the same time, I had a very good media background. So when the SFA job was advertised, I applied for that and got the job. Initially, it was a media relations manager. Scotland was about to qualify for yet another World Cup.
In France, yeah.
In France, they realised that there was a lot of media coverage, and they just needed an additional resource to handle that. So I was the first dedicated full-time press officer that the SFA had.
You and your background, how were you viewed by the what you might call the sort of Scottish football media mafia?
With great suspicion, as you might expect, because they'd had no previous experience of me. At the same token, I'd had no previous experience of them and their strange ways. So it was a bit of a learning curve on both sides. And obviously I had people within the SFA who could show me the ropes, tell me about who's important, who's less important, what systems they were. But it was a very steep learning curve from my side.
You did have a World Cup to focus the mind, which is like you would probably take people's minds off, like, who the hell were you?
Well, very much so. And you soon, I mean, there's two things you soon learn. First of all, that it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, football dominates it. So what happens on the field is far, far more important to anything a press officer ever says. And the other side is when you do screw up in football, it's such a rapid moving sport,
yes,
that a day or 2 days later, your mistake is forgotten about and it's all chip paper. So you can move on very, very quickly.
Did you feel you used some of the implicit skills we talked about earlier from the academy to win over people and to forge a happy working relationship?
I would never describe it as a happy working relationship, but yes, I did do that. And it was a question of seeing how the media was changing at that time, because the internet was just starting. Sky and the digital channels were just starting to get more of a foothold. So football was transferring from this traditional model of the daily newspapers holding all the cards and all the power to a very different model where video and then internet became king. So who was important and what markets you had to service changed quite rapidly over the time that I was there. And within football itself, it was a very rapid moving background as well, with new managers, crisis to crisis all the time. So I very soon became hardened to that kind of environment.
Yes,
and had to settle in.
What were some of the crises you can talk about on the record? Any particular ones come to mind?
Well, before I even played my very first match with the SFA in September 1997, Princess Diana died.
Oh yeah,
and
that's right.
In the week before Scotland played Belarus in a World Cup qualifier, which was scheduled to be played on the day of the funeral. And there was a huge stushy about that, which came and went very rapidly because everything happened within the space of a week. But the SFA was very roundly condemned at the time for being unwilling to shift, a lot of it unfairly. And ultimately the game was moved back 24 hours. But behind the scenes, it was a frightening time. So I had all that, this whirlwind of a scandal before I'd even had my first match under my belt. Goodness. So, and I suppose in a way, I was too new to take any of the blame, which was a blessing in disguise. But that really hit home to me how important football could be to the nation in a context you wouldn't really expect it to have.
How much of your dealings was to do with the Scotland football team, and how much of your dealings was to do with other related stuff for which the SFA are the governing body of the game in Scotland? I'm thinking of junior, grassroots league reconstruction, that kind of thing. What was the balance?
Well, I was head of communications for the Scottish Football Association as a whole.
Right.
Now, the national team always took priority over that. So that if there was a national team game, then I was fully wrapped up in organising the daily press conferences and the build-up, the match coverage itself, and within the department. We had to deal with all the accreditation and the pre-match planning. So that was I suppose the high-profile icing on the cake for me. But at the same time, the SFA operated 12 months of the year, whereas the national team would only play once a month or twice a month or so. So between that, you had all the other stuff, the disciplinary hearings, the admin, keeping the website up to date, trying to promote grassroots football, which then, as now, the media tend not to be very interested in. So you always felt like you're flogging a dead horse when the people say to you, we need to get this coaching course into the Daily Record. And you say, they're not going to write about it. They're not interested. And at the same time, you had all the personalities, so that I moved through a range of national team managers and a range of chief executives. So you always had to be aware of how these different people reacted to the media, how they wanted to portray their own persona, how good they were at dealing with certain aspects of the media, how they could deal with the story. So there's a lot of management going on behind the scenes as well as what actually hit the press. My big regret is that I didn't keep a diary at the time, because it was just so busy. And even now I can look back on things and say, wow, I'd totally forgotten about that. And yet it was a major, major thing in my life at the time. But the nature of the game was it just moved on so quickly to the next crisis or the next big event.
What was your favourite moment in the 10 years that you look back on? Either a person or a match or an incident or something you were involved in?
Well, it's kind of topping and tailing of my 10 years there. The World Cup in 1998 was fantastic. I'd only ever been to the World Cup once as a fan. I went to Mexico in 1986. And here I was right at the very heart of the action. So we not only took part in the World Cup, but Scotland was playing in the opening match in the Stade de France against Brazil. Huge amount of media interest and activity around about that. And it was just this bizarre time walking out before the match, and I was actually sitting on the Scotland bench through the game, which was a new experience for me.
Yes.
And it was just great fun to be there.
The fact that you're pretty fluent in French naturally helped as well.
Yeah, well, that was a lucky bonus.
Yeah.
So that I could speak to a lot more people than many others in the squad.
Yes.
We actually had one French-speaking player, John Collins,
of course,
who was playing in Monaco at the time.
And who scored the goal in that game, did he not?
He got the penalty, yes. So John and I were able to sort of do quite a few interviews with the French media while we were there, and everybody else just did the Scottish press. It was good fun. And I suppose the other highlight of my time there was at the other end of the career when Scotland had a great team in 2006, 2007 or thereabouts, and it was that famous victory back in the same city, different stadium, but in Paris, when Scotland beat France with the McFadden wonder goal.
Yes,
it was just stunning that Scotland could do that. But I have to say, for all the highlights with the national team, there were an awful lot of lows.
Yes,
and it was a struggle for many years. The Bertie Vogts era, in particular, being a very difficult time.
You then decided to leave the SFA. You then went to be head of comms at Stirling University. Is that when you started to think, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. I want to do some writing. I want to be involved in sort of education and things like that, and not, still to do with sport. Was that when this whole idea got hold of you?
It was a lot less planned and structured than that. After 10 years at the SFA, I thought I'm burnt out. I need a change of scenery. Much as I love being involved in football, I need to move on. I did retain, and I still do retain, a working role in football, because I'd already then started working with UEFA, and as a media officer, which was involved in media operations, at their matches, at the Champions League, European finals, and so on. So rather unplanned, a few months after I'd left the SFA, I was doing a fair bit of work with UEFA, but a short-term job came up at Stirling University, which is 2 miles from my front door, as maternity cover for their head of comms. So I thought, well, that would be a good job to do. And I ended up staying for 3 years, because when my maternity cover decided to return, she wanted to come back part-time. So we job shared for the next couple of years.
Oh, fantastic.
So I had the best of both worlds. I had a fairly high-profile, responsible job, but I didn't have to go in every day. I could go in 2-3 days a week. So I was able to have that job, but also indulge my own passion for football. I'd written my first couple of books by that time. I did a biography of Arthur Kinnaird, and then I wrote about the birth of international football.
Back to another sport, you're on the board of the Plan Museum of International Rugby at Raeburn Place. You're involved with the Scottish Sports Hall of Fame at Hampden. These are all things that work well, given your interest and your knowledge. And that must be another thing to not only dig out information, but some of the artifacts that we see in museums. That must be an interesting role as well.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged that in recent years, museums have started to become interested in sport. The prime one in football is the Scottish Football Museum at Hampden Park. And rugby has always lacked sort of a great sense of its own history. The SRU had a museum and archive at Murrayfield, but it closed about 20 years ago, and it's been in storage ever since. So I was very pleased to be approached by the people at Raeburn Place to say, look, we're thinking of doing a museum. Would you like to come on board? And it's been fascinating. It's taking perhaps a bit longer than they would have liked, because inevitably it's very hard to get finance for museum, but I think they're making good progress on that.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been down to Raeburn Place recently would have seen the developments going up. The shops are about to open. The new stadium is about to open. It's a complete transformation from the time when I used to traipse down there after school to play hockey or cricket or rugby or whatever. So when that opens, I think it will help to generate a lot more interest in sporting history, and in particular academical history.
Great. Well, I'm sure that lots of people will come to, as a result of this interview, hopefully take a look at some of your books and again and see your website as well. What's the website address, by the way?
It's scottishsporthistory.com.
Perfect. We shall look at that shortly. Just summing up, Andy, just going back to the academy, and it's come full circle almost, because you're now involved in something happening at Raeburn Place. What if there are younger Accies listening and watching this, or people leaving school shortly, what are the kind of things that you would say to them that you've stuck by and have encouraged you throughout your career?
I think you need to treasure the experience and the education that the academy gives you. A lot of it you might not realize at the time, but you develop life skills, you develop friendships, and dare I say it, in Edinburgh, connections that can all stand you in good stead through the rest of your career. Now, you can't depend on the academy for that, but it's a very good sort of background to whatever you may choose to do in your life.
And also, you followed your dream, really, because, from the age of 12, you fell in love with football, and it's carried you, reasonably successfully throughout your life as well. So there's a sense of, if you like something, make the most of it.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in a topic, it doesn't matter how arcane or obscure it is, be prepared to follow that topic, because you never know where it will come into your future career, whether you can actually get paid to indulge in your hobby, which is what I've been lucky enough to do. Then if you have the right skills and the right background, you'd be amazed what will come up.
Great. Couple of quick final things. Have you been back to Henderson Row or Newfield recently? You know, your old stomping ground?
Well, I'm old enough now to have been invited to a couple of reunions. So I've sat in the Grand Hall in Henderson Row and had dinner with people I haven't seen for 40 years. And it's a funny thing, inevitably, some of them haven't changed a bit. Others are utterly unrecognizable and have changed shape in various ways and lost all their hair and the things that happen when you start to grow old. But it's fascinating going back to the school after a while. Some things look just the same, others are utterly transformed because they've rebuilt a lot of the buildings, they've reused places, they've expanded next door because the Donaldson's building wasn't part of the school when I was there, for example. Yeah. But it's great to see the place thriving, and I still feel that it's played a major role in my life, and I'm delighted to be part of it.
I'm talking of your life. What's the next project that you're starting work on? What can we see in a bookshop or a television set coming up soon?
I'm always writing things. I mean, my website, because I have my own website, I can pick and choose what I write about, what I'm interested in. My next book is a who's who of Scotland international football players, which has been done before, but I'm trying to do it a bit better than.
Are you building on the one that's already been done, or are you starting from scratch?
It's a bit of both, but I needed to start from scratch because inevitably when historians were working 20, 30 years ago, they went down a lot of blind alleys. So I thought the best way is really just to do it from scratch. But that's been keeping me busy. I just need a few archives to reopen after lockdown to finish it off, and then that'll be out in the next year.
And finally, Andy, favourite footballer from all those footballers you're going to write about?
I recently voted for James McFadden, who is not by any means the greatest Scottish footballer of all time, but by God, he created a few great memories for the goals he scored in my time there. So I'd go for him.
On that note, we will leave it. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion and chat, and good luck with all your projects in the future. Thanks very much indeed, Andy Mitchell.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.